The sun hung low over the Arizona border town of Dry Creek, burning the world into a blistered haze. Heat shimmered above the dirt street like restless spirits, and the air tasted of dust, iron, and desperation. Folks said the West built people tough, but the West also broke them, and today it was trying its damnedest to break Eliza Grant. She stood on a rough wooden platform in the center of town. Wrists bound in front of her, chin lifted in pure defiance despite the bruise blooming across her cheek. Her once white blouse was streaked with sand and sweat. A crowd gathered below ranch hands smelling of whiskey, travelers seeking entertainment, and townsfolk with nothing better to do than watch the humiliation of a young woman who dared fight back. The sheriff stood beside her, sweating through his vest. "Pay the fine, Miss Grant, and this all ends," he announced. "I didn't steal a damn thing, and you know it," Eliza snapped. The sheriff's jaw tightened. Everyone knew she'd been framed by Carl Denson, a ranch foreman with a reputation thicker than his skull. When Eliza refused his uninvited advances at the saloon, he claimed she'd robbed him. He produced a pouch of coins as evidence, coins he had likely stolen from his own ranch hands. And the sheriff, whose pockets Carl conveniently lined during election season, accepted every word of it. Eliza's fine was a sum no working woman could afford. So the sheriff came up with a solution Dry Creek had used far too often: auction her labor to the highest bidder until her debt was paid. Legal way to disguise an injustice. Eliza scanned the crowd, fury simmering. She would not cry. She would not beg. She would not give Carl or any other man here the satisfaction of seeing fear. Carl Denson himself leaned against a post with a smug grin, ready to buy her. She'd rather choke on desert dust than work for him. "Let's start the bidding." The sheriff barked, lifting his hat to wipe sweat from his forehead. Before Carl could open his mouth, movement stirred at the edge of the crowd. The townspeople parted like water around a rock as a tall figure stepped forward. He wore buckskin leggings, a bone-buttoned shirt, and a necklace of carved shell beads that flashed in the sun. His long black hair was tied back with a strip of leather, and his stride was steady, deliberate, as if the earth itself welcomed him with every step. An Apache warrior. Dry Creek fell into whispers. Taza of the Chiricahua. Some men shifted uneasily. Others stared. Tensions between locals and Apache bands had been high for years. But Taza was known for settling disputes peacefully, an oddity the newspapers never bothered mentioning. He stopped in front of the platform, expression unreadable. Eliza glared down. "What do you want?" The sheriff cleared his throat. "You here to bid or to—" Taza lifted a small leather pouch and handed it over. "I will cover the woman's fine." Gasps spread through the crowd. Carl stepped forward. "Now, hold on, this ain't your business." Taza's eyes shifted toward him, not hostile, but sharp enough to cut stone. Carl fell quiet. The sheriff counted the coins, and his eyebrows shot up. "It covered the fine exactly." Well, that settles it." Eliza jerked against her bindings. "I don't want anyone buying my freedom. Especially not." And then her anger sharpened into a blade of pure threat. "Touch me and I swear I'll kill you." She hissed at Taza. The crowd sucked in a breath. Carl smirked, expecting Taza to bristle or back down. But the Apache warrior only smiled, calm, small, almost amused. Not mocking, but understanding, as though he had expected her fire all along. Without a word, he reached into his belt pouch and pulled out a small knife. Gasps erupted, not because he raised it in threat, but because he cut her bindings with a clean, swift motion. Eliza froze. Taza stepped back immediately, giving her space. "You are free," he said simply. "Free?" It felt like a word she hadn't heard in weeks. But freedom in the West was never simple, and she knew that. Carl glared daggers at both of them, and the sheriff's expression hinted trouble wasn't over. The moment she stepped off this platform, danger would follow. She swallowed. Meeting Taza's calm gaze, whatever came next, he wasn't her captor, but he might be the only thing standing between her and the men who wanted to break her. Dry Creek emptied behind them like a bad dream that refused to die. The sun was dropping toward the western rim of the world, coloring the sky in burning oranges that washed over the desert like fire on old parchment. Eliza Grant trudged ahead of the Apache warrior, jaw tight, shoulders stiff, the rope mark still raw around her wrists. Every few steps she threw a glare backward just to make sure he wasn't creeping closer. He never was. Taza kept a respectful 5 paces behind her, hands loosely at his sides. His posture calm as a still pond dot, it grated on her nerves more than if he'd tried something. "You don't need to follow me," she snapped over her shoulder. "I do," he replied mildly. "You are not safe." Eliza barked a humorless laugh. "I'm safer without a stranger trailing me like a shadow." Taza didn't argue. He simply kept walking, boots crunching against the burnt red sand. The wind kicked up dirt devils across the valley floor, and Eliza shielded her eyes. She had no hat, no canteen, no horse snuffing. Her belongings were still locked up in the sheriff's office because Carl Denson had seized them under the charge of property in dispute. Taza, on the other hand, had a sturdy paint horse tied at the edge of town, a bow and quiver slung over his shoulder, and a small satchel filled with supplies. The man was prepared for everything. Eliza was prepared for nothing, but she'd rather walk barefoot across cactus than admit she needed help after an hour of silent travel. Taza spoke again, his voice low and even. "Carl Denson will follow. I know. He is angry. I know. He will bring men." She clenched her fists but kept her chin high. "I can handle him." Taza didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth hung between them like the heat. Eliza couldn't handle Carl, not alone, not unarmed. And Taza had stepped between her and that ugly reality, without asking anything in return, which irritated her even more. They paused at a dry wash running between sandstone ridges. Taza knelt and brushed the soil with his fingertips. "Tracks," he murmured. Eliza stiffened. "Whose?" "3 horses headed south. 1 lame. They follow us." Her heart hammered. Carl's men. Taza rose silently and offered her his waterskin. "Drink." Eliza's pride flared hot. She snatched the skin and raised it, but then froze, staring at him. "You're not drinking first?" "You need it more," she frowned. "Why?" "You lost blood." "How did?" He looked at her wrists, the marks red and irritated. "That rope was tied too tight." "Your hands trembled." Eliza swallowed hard. She hadn't realized he'd noticed anything. Most men noticed her figure, her clothes, or the idea of what they thought she owed them, not her pain. She drank, then shoved the waterskin back toward him. "Fine. Thanks." Taza accepted it with a nod, no smugness, no pity. They continued south until the light began to fade. Coyotes howled somewhere far off, and the air turned cold with that sudden nighttime bite unique to the desert. Eliza rubbed her arms. "Didn't expect it to get this cold. You should wear this." Taza handed her a small wool blanket. "I'm not your responsibility," she muttered. "No," Taza agreed. "But I gave my word." Eliza blinked. "Your word? To who?" He didn't answer. Instead, he pointed to a cluster of tall rocks forming a sheltered alcove. "We rest here." "It is safe." She sat stiffly, watching him tend to his horse and build a small fire. He moved with careful efficiency, making no unnecessary sound. Every motion was deliberate, as if he'd practiced it 1,000 times. When he finally sat on the opposite side of the fire, the flames flickered between them like a line drawn in glowing amber. "You think I'm going to run?" she asked. I think you will try, Taza said honestly. But you do not know this land. At night, the desert hides its teeth. I would not let you walk into its jaws. Eliza stared into the fire, fighting the warmth creeping into her chest. No man had spoken to her like that, not in years. Not with gentleness. Not with truth. She took a slow breath. If you didn't want anything from me, why pay my fine? Taza looked up at the stars, his expression softening. I told you earlier, you are not safe. A coyote leaves a wounded rabbit because he knows another predator will take it. Carl Denson is a hungry man. I could not leave you in his path. Eliza swallowed. His meaning was clear. Taza hadn't freed her to claim her. He had freed her so no one else could. The fire cracked softly as the desert night deepened. Something in her chest loosened, just a little. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. All right, she said quietly. You can follow. For now. Taza nodded once, a shadow of a smile touching his lips, and for the first time since her world had fallen apart, Eliza felt the faintest hint of something she'd forgotten how to feel: safety. The desert had a way of testing people, and Eliza Grant was beginning to learn it was no respecter of pride, stubbornness, or defiance. The wind picked up mid-morning, whipping the red sand into tiny whirling demons that scratched at her skin and stung her eyes. Dust infiltrated every fold of her clothing, every strand of her hair, and every inhale she took. Taza rode slightly ahead, his horse moving steadily despite the chaos. Every now and then he would turn to check on her. His calm presence was like an anchor in the storm, and Eliza, much as she hated to admit it, clung to it. This doesn't look good, she shouted over the shrieking wind. No, Taza replied. His voice was steady low, carrying across the turbulent air. We should find shelter. They reached a ridge of jagged rocks that jutted up like broken teeth against the sky. Taza guided her toward a small alcove at the base of the rocks, a natural cavity that would shield them from the worst of the sandstorm. They dismounted quickly, and Taza secured the horses to nearby boulders. Using leather straps he carried in his satchel. Once inside the alcove, the storm felt like a living creature outside, howling, angry, and relentless. The two sat close to one another, the heat of Taza's body providing a strange comfort amid the cold grit of the storm. Eliza wiped dust from her eyes, her anger simmering. She still didn't trust him, not fully. But she couldn't deny the fact that he had saved her once again, and likely would do it again if the desert itself tried to swallow her whole. You could have left me, she muttered, her voice rough from shouting over the wind. I could have, Taza admitted, but I would not. Eliza's fingers tightened around her knees. Why? Why go out of your way for me? You don't even know me. Taza looked at her, his dark eyes steady and unreadable. I do know you, more than you realize. I saw your father's insignia on your saddle. He saved my life when I was a boy. I promised him, if I ever had the chance, I would repay that debt. Eliza blinked. Her heart skipped, a strange warmth blooming beneath the dirt and fear. Her father had been kind, honorable, and brave. She had never imagined that a gesture from years ago could ripple into this moment, placing her life in the hands of a stranger. You knew my father? She whispered. Taza inclined his head. I remember him well. His courage saved my life, and I would not let harm come to you. For a long moment, the storm's roar seemed to fade in the alcove. Eliza's anger cooled, replaced with awe and a reluctant sense of gratitude. She still hated the circumstances, the humiliation, and the uncertainty of her journey. But Taza's presence, calm and unyielding, forced her to confront the fact that not every man in the West was cruel or greedy. Some carried honor quietly, without announcement or expectation. The wind battered the rocks, but inside, a fragile peace settled between them. Taza offered her a water skin, and she accepted it, drinking deeply. For a moment, they sat in silence, listening to the storm. Eliza noticed how he watched the desert beyond the alcove, scanning for dangers she couldn't see. Every motion was deliberate, measured. He was alert, but not anxious. He was ready, but not afraid. "You saved me," she said finally, almost to herself. "No," he corrected. "I saved a promise, but you saved yourself, every step you resisted and fought." Eliza swallowed hard. She didn't know how to respond. She had spent so long surviving alone, relying on no one, that the thought of sharing her journey or trusting someone felt foreign. Yet in the quiet aftermath of the storm's arrival, she understood something vital. Trust was not weakness. It was strength, when given wisely. As the hours passed, the storm eventually subsided, leaving behind a world coated in fine red dust that glinted like crushed rubies in the afternoon sun. The desert seemed calmer now, almost respectful, as if acknowledging their incense. Taza untied the horses, and together they mounted. Ready to continue south. Eliza felt a subtle shift within her, a growing respect for the man, who had claimed nothing of her, yet given everything necessary to ensure her survival. She was beginning to understand that bravery and honor were not always loud. Sometimes they were measured in quiet gestures, in watching the horizon while the world threatened to swallow you whole, and for the first time in weeks, she felt hope, a fragile ember burning against the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the Wild West. The desert air had cooled, but the tension between Eliza and the Apache warrior, Taza, was far from gone. They rode in silence, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the sandstone ridges and sagebrush plains. Eliza's muscles ached from the long journey, but her mind was alert. Every sound, every shift in the wind, screamed that danger was not yet behind them. She spotted at first a glint of metal reflecting the sun far off on the horizon. At first, she thought it was mirage or a distant rock, but as they drew closer, she realized with growing dread, Carl Denson and his men were following them. The ranch foreman's persistence was as relentless as the desert itself. "Eliza," Taza said softly, but firmly, "they have found us." Her stomach tightened. "I knew this would happen. He won't rest until he gets what he thinks he owns." Taza's horse slowed, matching hers. He didn't panic. He never did. That calm irritated her at first, but now she could see the purpose behind it. He was calculating, waiting for the right moment to act. "You can help," he said simply. "What? Me?" Her voice was sharp. "I can't fight them off." "No," he corrected. "Not fight. Survive. Listen. Learn. Apply what you have been taught." Eliza's jaw tightened. He meant the survival techniques he had shared over the past days, how to read the desert for hidden dangers, how to mask tracks, how to use the terrain to an advantage. She had thought them simple lessons at the time, but now they were tools of life and death. They dismounted near a shallow wash surrounded by jagged boulders. Taza instructed her to gather small rocks and brush to create false trails to guide the horses away from the obvious paths. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from a sense of responsibility. For the first time, she wasn't just being saved, she was saving someone else. Carl Denson's men approached, shouting and brandishing clubs and ropes. One swung a lasso carelessly, and Eliza ducked instinctively, hiding behind the rock she had chosen. She remembered Taza's teaching. The desert can protect you if you let it. She guided their horses through narrow passages where the pursuers could not follow, slowed the men with hidden debris, and used the shadows to mask their movements. Taza watched silently, a proud glimmer in his eyes. He didn't need to speak. Eliza's confidence was growing with every step, every calculated decision. She was becoming his equal in this escape, an active participant rather than a passive passenger. After what felt like hours, but was only minutes, they had lost the men. Carl Denson's frustrated screams echoed across the valley, fading as the wind carried them away. Eliza leaned against a rock, gasping. "I did it," she whispered, almost in disbelief. "You did," Taza said. His tone was calm, yet there was an unmistakable pride behind his words. "You used knowledge, not anger. Strength without control can destroy. Knowledge guides strength." Eliza looked at him, the adrenaline fading and leaving a strange warmth in its place. "I thank you. I never thought I could do it." "No one thinks they can," Taza replied. "Not until they have no choice." For the first time, Eliza felt a connection to the land and the man beside her. The desert, which had seemed harsh and unforgiving, now felt like a teacher. She understood that survival wasn't just about brute strength. It was about observation, patience, and applying what you know in the right way. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of purple and gold, Eliza and Taza mounted their horses once more. The danger had passed for now, but the lessons lingered. She had faced fear head-on, had relied on her mind as much as her body, and had begun to respect Taza not as a savior, but as a teacher, a guide. And perhaps something more. She glanced at him, and for the first time she spoke without anger or defiance. I understand now. You didn't just save me, you gave me the tools to save myself." Taza nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "That is freedom. True freedom is not being rescued. It is learning to walk through the storm and survive it." Eliza felt a flicker of hope. The desert was still dangerous, the West still harsh, but for the first time, she felt capable, armed with knowledge, and ready to face whatever came next. And in the quiet after the chase, she realized something else. Survival had led to trust, and trust might just lead to something she never thought she'd find in this wild, unforgiving land. The ride from the desert pass into the valley beyond felt like stepping into a different world. The air was cooler, tinged with the scent of pinyon and sagebrush, and the river that wound lazily through the valley glittered like scattered gems under the morning sun. For the first time in days, Eliza Grant felt that the land might not be entirely hostile. Taza guided her along a narrow trail lined with wildflowers and small shrubs. He moved with quiet confidence, every step measured and purposeful, as if he belonged to this land more than the dirt-stained streets of Dry Creek. Eliza, following closely, found herself absorbing everything: the sounds of birds, the way the wind shifted through the canyons, the patterns of tracks that marked every creature that had passed before them. "You are observant," Taza remarked. "Most newcomers only see the surface. They miss the life beneath it." Eliza laughed softly. "I've had to notice. I don't have a choice." They reached a small clearing where a cluster of adobe-like structures nestled under the shelter of rocky cliffs. Smoke curled gently from several chimneys, and children's laughter rang out across the courtyard. Taza's village. As they approached, villagers paused their work and watched. There was curiosity in their eyes, but not fear. Taza nodded respectfully to several elders, who returned his greeting with solemn acknowledgement. Eliza felt the weight of unfamiliar eyes on her, but Taza's presence seemed to shield her. "This is your home," he said simply. "Here, you are safe." Eliza nodded but stayed silent. The weight of unfamiliar customs pressed on her. She didn't want to make a mistake. She didn't know the rules, the unspoken boundaries. Yet she felt an inexplicable pull, a sense that here she might find more than safety. Over the next few days, Eliza began to learn. Taza introduced her to members of the village, each interaction a lesson in patience, respect, and cultural nuance. She helped gather herbs for healing, learning the properties of sage, chamomile, and yerba buena. She watched the elders teach the children, and with Taza's encouragement, she began teaching the younger girls English reading and writing. At first, it was awkward. The children giggled at her accent, the women scrutinized her every move. But gradually, respect grew. She realized that sharing knowledge was reciprocal. She was teaching. But she was also learning humility, observation, and a deep appreciation for a culture that had been misrepresented to her before. Taza never pushed her. He never expected her gratitude. He simply existed beside her, patient, silent when necessary, attentive when needed. His lessons were subtle: how to carry water without spilling, how to read the clouds for coming storms, how to move quietly across rocky terrain. Each day she absorbed more than she realized. One evening, after a long day gathering herbs, Eliza and Taza sat on a cliff overlooking the valley. The sun set in streaks of gold and crimson, reflecting off the river like molten fire. "You've changed," Taza observed quietly. "I have," she admitted. I never thought I could belong anywhere like this." "You belong where you choose," Taza said. "Freedom is not only being safe. It is knowing you are welcome, but not required. You may leave at any time, and still you may return." Eliza looked at him, understanding dawning. This was not just kindness. This was trust. And in trust, there was a power she had never experienced before, the freedom to be herself without fear of harm. Without expectation of ownership, without the weight of judgment she had carried her entire life. As the stars emerged, glittering against the deep indigo sky, Eliza felt a growing respect for Taza, not as a savior, but as a man who had guided her through chaos with patience and quiet wisdom. She realized that safety was only the beginning. Understanding and connection were the real treasures of the West, treasures that could not be stolen or bought, only earned. For the first time since the auction in Dry Creek, Eliza allowed herself to relax. She understood that she was not merely a passenger in her own story, she was an active participant, learning, adapting, and thriving. And as she sat there, shoulder to shoulder with Taza, the subtle warmth of his presence was a reminder that trust could be more valuable than freedom alone. Eliza knew one thing for certain: whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them not alone, but alongside someone who had earned her respect and, in turn, her gratitude. And perhaps, in time, something more. The first light of dawn stretched across the valley, turning the desert cliffs a soft rose and gold. Birds sang tentatively, heralding a new day, and the river below sparkled like silver in the early sun. For Eliza Grant, this morning felt different. The weight she had carried for weeks, the fear, the uncertainty, the constant threat of violence seemed lighter somehow, replaced by a quiet certainty she had not expected to find in the wild. Unforgiving west. She stood on a ridge overlooking the village, her fingers tracing the rough fabric of her travel cloak. Taza approached silently, as he always did, his presence steady, comforting, and yet commanding in its calmness. He did not speak immediately, letting the morning air fill the space between them. "You've made a place for yourself here," Taza said finally, his voice low and even. "The village respects you. The children look up to you. And you have learned much." Eliza's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. "I never thought I would belong anywhere," she admitted. "But I think I might here. And I've realized something. Freedom is more than walking away from danger. It's choosing where to stay, who to trust, and how to live." Taza nodded, watching her carefully. "And what is your choice, Eliza Grant?" Her heart thumped in her chest. She had traveled a long road with him, not only across the desert, but across fear, anger, and uncertainty. She had resisted him at every turn, threatened him, and yet he had never taken offense. He had guided, taught, and protected her not as a captor, but as a partner in survival. "I could leave," she said softly. "I am free to return to Dry Creek to reclaim my old life. But I don't want to. Not anymore. Not after everything. Not after learning who you are and what this land can teach me." Taza's expression softened. He stepped closer, but still left her space to breathe as he had always done. "Then you stay. Not because you owe me anything, but because you choose to. That is true freedom. That is courage." Eliza's hand trembled slightly as she reached for his. She could feel the warmth of his skin and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. She began, then paused, recalling every lesson he had taught her, every moment of patience and guidance. "I choose to stay. With you." Taza's lips curved into a faint smile, the first time she had ever seen him show emotion so openly. "Good," he said simply. "I was hoping you would." The village stirred below, the daily work resuming. Children laughed and ran along the river bank. The elders tended to their tasks, nodding to Eliza as she passed. She realized that she had become part of this community, not as an outsider, not as someone rescued, but as a person who belonged, who contributed, who had earned her place. And she understood, with clarity and relief, that her journey had not only been about surviving the West, it had been about learning to trust, to respect, and to embrace knowledge. She had discovered that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act wisely in spite of it. She had learned that respect was earned through deeds, not demanded through words. And she had realized that true love could never be forced, it could only grow where freedom and trust existed. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with streaks of amber and crimson, Eliza and Taza sat together on a ridge overlooking the valley. The fire flickered between them, casting long shadows that danced across the rocks. "You have changed this land for me," she said quietly, leaning slightly against him. "And you've changed me as well." Taza turned his head, his dark eyes meeting hers. "And you have changed me," he replied. "I have learned patience and the strength of your spirit. I am grateful for that." They shared a moment of silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the clear desert sky. The harshness of the West was still there, the dangers, the challenges, but it no longer felt insurmountable. Together they had faced storms, pursued by men who sought to harm her, and survived the unforgiving desert. Together they had learned the land and each other. Eliza smiled, resting her hand in his. "Then let's face the future together. No fear, no regrets." Taza nodded, the quiet strength in his eyes unwavering. "Together," he agreed, and so, in the heart of the Arizona desert, beneath the endless sky and the watchful stars, Eliza and Taza began their new life. A life built on mutual respect, trust, love, and the lessons learned from a land that could kill, teach, and ultimately nurture those willing to listen. The West remained wild as it always had been. But for the first time, Eliza felt not fear, but freedom and a sense of belonging that would endure no matter what storms lay ahead. The end.